Going to get started now. Just wanted to welcome everybody for our UMindfulness launch event for 2021. We are all in for a terrific night of our time with Sharon Salzberg. And it's been about a year since we've all been together as a community. So I just wanted to say that it's wonderful to be together, even in this strange virtual environment, which we're all probably used to by now. And for those of you who have not come to any UMindfulness events before, we're glad you joined us. Just wanted to say a few things about what we do, who we are, and then tell you about some upcoming events. And then I'll be handing it over to Scott Rogers, who will introduce Sharon. So the first thing to say is that UMindfulness was started in 2010. My name is Amishi Jha. I'm a faculty member here at the University of Miami, and Scott Rogers and I started it together really as a way to begin having a central hub for mindfulness related activities on campus. So our work at UMindfulness involves events like this one, evenings together, lectures, public lectures. We also offer courses that people can sign up for and take with some of our wonderful teachers. And we engage in various research with multiple faculty members and multiple schools on campus being involved. In addition, on campus, we offer events that happen in an ongoing fashion. Usually these days it's on Zoom, but tethered to things on campus. So I wanted to just mention a couple things regarding upcoming events we've got, and be on the lookout for these. We've got public courses that you can sign up for. We'll be sending out some fee and registration information so you can sign in. We've got Joshua Rooks with the Mindful Connections offering beginning in February, at the end of February. Lucas Irwin, who has a really innovative new course called Mindful Man, Discovering Personal Growth in the Present Moment. Looking forward to that one. That one is, I believe, 6 weeks long as well. Adriana will be offering an MBSR course. She's one of our wonderful teachers that's offered many courses, and is always a treat to have time with her as a teacher. And we've got Peter Kellen, who will be offering an MBSR course. So we've got them sort of distributed throughout the next few months. So hopefully one of these will work for you and you'll be able to join for one of the courses. One of the things I wanted to say in the spirit of what we do at UMindfulness is that in addition to being able to take courses, we would love for you to actually help advance science in this new field called contemplative neuroscience and contemplative science. So as you sign up for courses, you may be asked to opt in to be a part of our research studies, so we can all learn more about the benefits and the nature of how mindfulness training, for example, impacts brain function and brain health, as well as our psychological well-being. So do be on the lookout for that as well if you do sign up for a course. The final thing I wanted to mention before I hand it over to Scott is that there are wonderful ongoing offerings of mindfulness on campus. Now I put that in quotes because of course all these are virtual these days. We've got Mindful Looking, which is a very cool event that's connected with the activities of the Low Art Museum. And at the Richter Library, there's drop-in practices that are offered on Wednesdays. So do check out their websites if you'd like to join in, and everybody's welcome to attend. And now I just want to pass it off to my dear colleague, Scott Rogers, who will be introducing our speaker for tonight, Sharon Salzberg. Scott?
Thank you, Amishi. And thank you, Amishi, for so many years of collaboration with research and with trainings. And we're all very excited about your book that'll be coming out later this year. That's going to be a very important book. And I think we'll all learn a great deal from it as well. So thank you for that too. And everyone, welcome. How nice to come together again as our UMindfulness community. As Amishi said, it's been about a year. It was in February we had our last event, which was a live event with Rhonda McGee, a wonderful mindfulness teacher with a very important book on mindfulness and racial justice. And here we are a year later now in the Zoom environment. And as Amishi said, what's I think been meaningful to many, and you're all encouraged to participate, is notwithstanding the course of the year, the low mindful looking practice has been taking place every Tuesday without fail in a Zoom environment, and the mindfulness with the libraries, another opportunity to practice mindfulness, has also been taking place throughout the last year and will continue to do so. So we're so delighted to have so many colleagues and friends who are able to offer rich practices for all of us to help sustain us and to help us develop our own practice and understanding of mindfulness and of life and of being able to be together to support each other. And now here we have one of our great friends, Sharon Salzberg, has been perhaps the most um, sought, requested mindfulness teacher. You've been so kind over the years, Sharon. You've come and you've done 2-day retreats and 2-day retreats and speaking presentations. You've come to the law school and you've spoken to our students and met with our faculty and staff, which was just talked about earlier today. With someone who remembered it fondly and was so grateful for how you so generously offer your wisdom and compassion to us. And so welcome back again. For those of you who don't know, although if you don't know, it's easy enough to find out, Sharon is one of our great teachers, one of the great teachers of mindfulness in the world. Uh, really, like really. In 1971, she had her first intensive retreat in India. She's been practicing and teaching for much of that time since, teaching since 1974. So this is 50 years as a student of mindfulness and meditation, having learned from some of the no longer with us in this form teachers. And so not only is she just this extraordinary teacher unto herself, but she also carries the wisdom and shares that wisdom that she learned through her studies, as many of us do, sharing it with others. And that's what, in many ways, this is all about. If you don't know, Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts was established by Sharon and her dear friends, who many of you may also know, Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein, and is one of the great retreat centers and important retreat centers, which you will perhaps want to, if you're not familiar with, check out, because there's a great many offerings, both online now and in person, when we're able to reestablish a capacity to really get together in that way. Sharon has written many books. The most recent collection of books, although I will say, as I've shared before, Faith is one of my all-time favorites, although as they keep piling on, it's hard to know. And the most recent batch have had this interesting title, Real, from Real Happiness. And for those of you who might be interested, we'll share a link at the end, the annual Real Happiness, a meditation sort of like opportunity to really get your practice going through Sharon on a daily basis. We'll be starting, that's a free offering. And so she's a writer of these books. The most recent collection have been Real Happiness and Real Love and Real Happiness at Work. And now for today, we'll be exploring in particular Real Change. And I'll let Sharon tell you the essence of that, but it has a lot to do with how can we show up and stay sustainable in our endeavors? And how can we, if we tend to hang back, show up in a way that is meaningful for us and those in our lives. Sharon has also not only been generous with the UMindfulness in our community, but also with the Miami Book Fair. And if you've if you are interested in the Miami Book Fair for the last 2 years, she's come 3 times or participated 3 times, both in person and online. So we have one of our wonderfully important and kind and loving mindfulness teachers. I think that even though her publishers came up with the title Real in front of each of those, it's probably not lost on them, and certainly not lost on me, that Sharon is indeed a real person. She is as real as it gets. And so thank you, Sharon, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this evening to support each other and to learn from Sharon. And with that, Sharon.
Wow, thank you. I've always said, as is true, that you give me the best introductions. So that's really why I come back all the time, it's because, and both Scott and Amishi are very dear friends, and I've had the chance when we were all traveling and I would come down to Miami of actually staying with them and each of them. And one of my fond memories, although Amisha may not be that fond of it, of staying at our house is the fact that I'm a night owl and she is not. Plus she had, 2 young children and a job, like a very normal kind of job. And I would keep her up to like 2, 3 in the morning discussing like the mindfulness movement in the future. And she would just be like, all right, and finally she'd surrender and just say, you're right, I'm going to bed. So that's the kind of friend I am. And Scott just left me in my room. He was wise. So I do miss seeing everybody and being with everybody the way we all do, but I'm so happy for these kind of opportunities to gather. I think the sense of connection is real, which is also a favorite word of mine, and it's so important that we get this chance to be with one another. And how fantastic that these tools are also being offered in so many different ways that can be accessible to people. So my most recent book was called Real Change. In all honesty, it was kind of a joke title because there had been real happiness at work and real love. And then the publisher said, what should we call it? Let's call it Real Change. And it was like, haha. And then nobody ever thought of a better title. And I do treasure that word. One of our friends, Bob Thurman, who just retired from being a professor of Buddhist studies at Columbia University, is a scholar and a translator. And often when we would be teaching together, I noticed that one of his favorite words was realistic. and I would be a little bit dismissive internally. I think it's not exciting a word, really. Like, you put in all this effort and you're willing to do all this introspection and all of that to be more realistic. But the more I understood what he was trying to say and the more I understood it, the more I appreciated it. And it was just a sense of, to be aligned with the truth of things is, first of all, to feel free, not to feel so fragmented and divided, so to feel whole, to be effective, right? Much more effective if we are aligned with the truth of things rather than like the proverbial banging your head against the wall, trying to insist change is not happening or this is, the way things are when they're really not. And it's some distorted view. So to be real, to be realistic is a very precious thing and something to work toward more and more. So the book was going to be called Real Change. It is called Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. And the book was supposed to come out in June. Every word of it pretty much was written pre-pandemic. So I turned in the book December or January, and publishing being as kind of slow an endeavor as it is, the book wasn't coming out until June. And then it came out instead September 1st because of the pandemic. So first I should say I was inspired, I think, to write this book largely because of two populations of people that I've gotten to work with. One are just meditators, whatever they do in life, whatever their situation looks like. People, as they deepen mindfulness and awareness and insight, which is the most important kind of contribution of being more mindful, is having insight. Develop, I've seen, over thousands of people develop a much deeper sense of compassion that's very genuine and unforced, unfeigned. They really, as so many people have said things to me like, I was walking down the street and somebody came up to me and asked me for $1. And I gave them $1 because that's just been my practice. But it's the first time I ever looked that person in the eye and realized that was a human being. I've seen that so many times. And yet, even with an increased caring and compassion, there's often a feeling of, I can never do enough. Anything I can offer is so meager, it's so insufficient, it's just not enough. So I'm going to hang back. And I wanted to really urge people to try to do the good that's in front of them, even if it seems very small. Like to translate that caring into some action. And my model, she's right over there, is the Statue of Liberty. She's like my idol. She's my icon and has been since I was a child. And that's not the only copy I have here. The obvious, impression of her is compassion. It's welcome. It's caring. It's saying, you have a home here. Even you, that no one else wants. You can belong here. And that has always meant so much to me. And it was only when I was actually working on that book, Real Change, that I kind of comprehended more fully that she's a woman in mid-stride. She's taken a step. Like one of her legs is actually up. And usually we think of, or I think of the poem or the torch or something like that. I don't think like, oh, she's taking action. And so I was very motivated by really trying to urge people to take that step, even if it seems very small. And then there's another whole group of people that I've worked with, certainly over the last several years, who are what we call caregivers. I always think there has to be a better word, and maybe we will come up with a better word, but these are the people, maybe they're taking care of someone at home or in their family, parent, a child, or children, or maybe professionally. I've worked with frontline domestic violence shelter workers, people who staff the shelters, international humanitarian aid workers, people who are working, say, in the refugee camps in Syria. These days, a lot of medical personnel, from ambulance drivers to doctors and nurses and EMTs and people like that, and people who are really in some ways on the front lines of suffering. They're seeing the vulnerability, the tenderness, the difficulty of others, and it's so hard to sustain that effort, to not burn out, to feel in some way replenished, because the structures of society may not be appreciating you much, really. And at one point I was just reflecting, like, who else reminds me of these people? And I thought, oh, activists, people who actually are taken with the idea of trying to make a difference structurally in this world and to make it a better place with less suffering and more love and so on. And so I wanted to try to help offer tools, at least as an option for people, as an experiment, that might help people sustain that effort. And, looking at Scott and thinking about the legal profession, I'm always intrigued by the fact that I have been teaching meditation, as he said, here in this country and around the world since 1974. And in the beginning, all of the offerings we had were just completely open. It was like whoever showed up. And then as various groups like formed themselves and asked if we might come in and offer something, the most pronounced professional group was attorneys, whether it was law school or practicing lawyers. And I thought, why is that? There's something about that activity and the sensitivity or awareness people had. So whatever one is doing, I think it's an interesting experiment in resilience, in sustainability, in balance, to explore something like these tools. So I wrote the book and I turned it in, and then the pandemic happened. And of course I thought, did I just write a completely irrelevant book? I wasn't totally sure. I mean, there are chapters in there, like moving from anger to courage, moving from grief to resilience, remembering to take in the joy and having balance and equanimity. So I thought maybe it's okay, but I wasn't really sure. And then a friend of mine was reading it in order to excerpt it. And this was the sort of the very beginning of the pandemic, but it was already, very apparent. And he himself was phenomenally anxious. And he said to me, I'm reading the book and I like it, but I keep reading those examples and thinking, that's what made you anxious? Wait till you see what's coming. So I went, oh, So I went back to the publisher and I said, well, since you're delaying publication, would it be okay if I wrote a preface to sort of try to contextualize those ideas into the present reality? And they said, okay. So then I had a little bit of time to really ponder, like, what do I want to say? And the primary question I kept asking myself was, what's still true? Like, in the midst of disruption and uncertainty and shattered expectations and grief and loss and all of it, like, what's still true? And it reminded me of, in Sanskrit, the word dharma, dharma, which is sometimes translated as the truth or the laws of nature, sometimes the Buddha's teaching, actually means that which sustains us, that which upholds us, that which we can count on, that which we're relying on. So it was that same kind of question. What's still true? And I thought of this thing I had read long ago, because actually it mentions it in Faith as well, which is a book I wrote like 18 years ago, that after the atom bomb dropped in Hiroshima, there was even further devastation because a rumor swept through that the grass and the trees and the flowers would never grow again. It's like the laws of nature themselves had just been broken, and there was nothing intact. There was nothing whole that could be counted on. And in fact, once that rumor was dispelled and people were assured that, yes, in fact, trees and flowers and grass would grow again, then they had a greater ability to go on. So I think that is our instinct, like, what can I rely on? What's whole? What's true? And I realized that for me, so much of what I could honestly answer were the things I have learned through my meditation practice, which means that they're elements, they're qualities of mind that I could cultivate, that we can cultivate. These aren't like unattainable or remote. You know, these are qualities and strengths we can actually rely on. So, and this, nicely enough, was reflected in Real Change. So it starts often with the development of what we call concentration, which really means some greater centeredness or steadiness of mind. And very often, we're going to do a little practice together as well. Very often that's cultivated by just choosing an object of awareness, resting our attention on that object, and when our minds wander, just simply letting go and coming back. It's easier said than done. But one of the really important words in there is rest. And I've seen that in these times, how important that quality is and how sometimes difficult it is. Let's say that object, that central object that you are resting your attention on is something like the feeling, the sensation of the breath. Very often we get a sense that if we get a stranglehold on the breath, our attention won't wander and it'll actually wander more. So we rest. And that is like a training in itself. We need those moments of respite. We need those moments of peace, of simply being, even if they're brief, because that will restore us. That will allow us to access just that sense of being, which is like wholeness. And then, of course, our minds go all over the place. They say, as is true, I think we often kind of flee to the past, but not in a useful way, which is also a possibility. But usually we go back and we're just ruminating about something we now have some regret over. And we're not doing it with an eye to make amends or for lessons learned. We're just going over it and over it and over it and over it. And I'd say especially at a time like this, our minds jump to the future and we create a scenario that has not happened and may never happen. That's like completely doleful. And we're trying to bear that. And we're so anxious. And and distraught. So in both those examples, it's like our life energy, our life force just is thrown away. And what we do in the process of concentrating is like we gather it back. We have it return to us. And over time, it really does return to us. It's not that our minds don't ever wander. They do, but we can come back so much more gracefully. We can come back so much more quickly so that we feel that energy return to us and it becomes available to us. And that is very empowering. And not only that, it's a very integrating process. Like we bring our energy together. We bring ourselves together instead of feeling so fragmented and all over the place. We come together. And I realize I am relying on that a lot. And it was a training. I often talk about how the very first instruction I ever had in meditation, which was, I just had a 50th anniversary of beginning meditation, January 7th, 1971. That was strange in itself, because it's like, how did that happen? But anyway, the first instruction I ever got was sit and feel your breath. And it was very difficult, much to my surprise. Good, it was very important, but one of the reasons it was difficult, I noticed, was because almost as soon as this breath was happening, I was kind of mentally leaning forward to get ready for the next 50. I was very frightened. I was very wary. I didn't know what might happen next. A lot had already happened to me in my life. It was like really hypervigilance. So for me at that time, balance looked like settle back. Let the breath come to you. I used to say to myself, you're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. It's like I had so much performance anxiety. I'd never done it before. So like settle back. Let the breath come to you. Just that gesture, that mental gesture, was like revolutionary for me. And this is the ways we practice. The techniques, the methods can seem very simplistic, but they're actually quite profound and working on a lot of different levels. So we learn to rest. We learn to come back. We learn to let go. All of that is very meaningful for a day in the life, in these rather more extreme circumstances or in any circumstances. So that is something I'm relying on. And then the great skill of mindfulness, which can be defined a lot of different ways and all, interesting and true, but different. I tend to define mindfulness as a quality of awareness where our perception of what's happening in the present moment is not so distorted by bias, like old fears, or very common one would be to have physical discomfort or mental, emotional discomfort, disappointment, or heartache. And right away start projecting what's it going to feel like tomorrow? What's it going to feel like next week? What's it going to feel like next year? And then try to bear it all at once, and it's unbearable. And to be able to see that tendency and just say, what am I feeling right now? Is sort of the task of mindfulness. So we come closer to whatever is actually happening without necessarily adding on the shame or the fear or the dislike or the grasping, like I'm going to keep this forever, whatever might be just habitually conditioned within us. And so we have a kind of cleaner, clearer view of what actually is happening. It's not so cluttered by all this stuff. So what we work to let go of is really those add-ons, right? We're not rejecting anything, any feeling, any thought pattern, anything. And this is a very important point. I think because the people often have the impression that for whatever reason, and there are a number of reasons, but we shouldn't feel what we're feeling. I should be beyond this. I mean, now I have a great rant for myself. You've been practicing for 50 years. Why is that still coming up, But the point isn't what is arising. The point is how we are with it. And we don't have to take everything to heart. We don't have to be frightened by the things that come up because they will also go if we cultivate that ability to just watch them come and go. We don't have to carry everything into action. And so whatever is arising, we can have a relationship to it that's more spacious and open and free. And that is the nature of mindfulness. I have friends, I don't have it in this room, who are taken to making me cups. Someone just sent me some t-shirts of things that I often say. So one of them is, we feel what we feel. And one of them is, something's just hurt. It's like a really good sized cup. Something's just hurt, because we're even these days maybe taught, well, if you had a better attitude, it wouldn't hurt. Or if you had the right way of thinking, it wouldn't hurt. But something's hurt. They just hurt. That's true. The question is there extra suffering, which we actually don't need? Is something difficult and then we're adding a sense of isolation? It's only me, rather than a sense of connection to others. Is something difficult and we're adding that shame? I should have been able to stop this. Why aren't I in control? Is something difficult and we're adding a kind of reified self-image? This is the only thing I ever feel. This is who I really am. There's so many possibilities that aren't useful, when we pile on. And so learning how to be with some very difficult feelings and allow ourselves the dignity of what we're feeling, but not getting lost in them. And also not sort of trying to push them away and disliking them. We sometimes say mindfulness is like a place in the middle where we can be with anything that arises, sensation, emotion, whatever it is, in a certain way. And that's the way. It's not being sucked in and consumed by it, but it's also not trying to push it away or deny it in some way. And so right there, you just, even in your body, if you kind of respond to what I just said, you can just feel it's like, oh, right? There's a sense of balance. There's a sense of greater peace as everything comes and goes. So certainly I have been relying on that, both allowing the feelings, which is very important, and also understanding there is also empowerment in learning how to relate differently to whatever may be arising. And remember to be compassionate toward oneself instead of judgmental. Remember it's not just me, ever. Things like that. And the other part of that, which is also a chapter in the book, is remembering to take in the joy. It sometimes takes a very conscious intentionality if things are really difficult, if there's a lot of stress, if there's a lot of struggle. There's so many reasons why we can also have a sort of weird or distorted relationship to joy, to pleasure, to wonder, to delight. Sometimes we're so distracted we hardly notice. Sometimes we have this very sort of strange sense of unrelenting standards. It's like nothing's perfect enough. I am so fond of telling this one story about a friend of mine who took me in Washington, D.C. to that area of the district where there are a great number of cherry trees planted that were the gift of, I think, an empress of Japan or something. And they all bloom at once, and that's cherry blossom season. So that's like a big tourist thing. So she was determined to get me there, even though I had like a very busy schedule. And we got there. And I was standing there looking at all these cherry blossoms and thinking, this is so beautiful. All these delicate pink blossoms, and they're just so lovely. And then my friend said, oh no, it's past the peak. And I thought, oh no, I'm having a really bad experience. This isn't good enough. We do that. And also, and very notably in times like this, where there is so much suffering, either our own or others, we feel guilty. We think, I can't let this in. I can't, how could I, what kind of person am I? Like appreciating this small thing, finding it so delightful. But here too, it's like almost like the science of resilience. Where does it come from? And what's the outcome of feeling depleted and embittered and overcome and exhausted? We don't have a sense of inner resource to repair, to take care of ourselves, and we don't have a sense of energy to help others or try to take care of others or even listen to others. So it comes back in a way to that word rest. It's like we have to allow the time to replenish, whatever that is going to look like for us. And part of that is taking in the joy, just the simple pleasures that may be coming our way. And then the last thing I'll talk about is a sense of connection. And it always struck me as sort of odd that meditation practice, for one thing, might look like the most solitary activity imaginable. You might be all alone doing it. You might have your eyes closed. But one of the insights that develops just automatically through being more mindful is realizing how interconnected our world is, that we live in an interconnected reality. We are not alone, however alone we might feel. And we can do that through reflection. There's so many ways of coming to that. Like when I was going into organizations or companies to teach, one of my favorite questions was always, how many other people need to be doing their job well for you to do your job well? I thought, oh, right. We are counting on a lot of people, actually. I was talking not too long ago with a physician who's the head of a big medical practice in this hospital. He said, who I'm really appreciating more than ever is the cleaning staff. And I thought, well, yeah, I can imagine that. But who are the people we look through? Who do we overlook? Who do we discount? Who do we objectify? And the more insight we have into the nature of things, the more we just sense like, oh, that sense of self and other and us and them, which is a useful construct in a lot of ways, is just a construct. And what's real is actually our lives are intertwined. They're interconnected. In some ways, like the virus is showing us the terrible face of that, and the beautiful face of that is compassion. It's a sense of caring. And I always also thought, pre-pandemic, when I would read about the healing effects of social connection, in all kinds of clinical conditions, I kept thinking, well, it can't just be a numbers game, like I only have 2 friends, I need 8, and then I'm safe, or then I can get over this, whatever disease or whatever. It must be an inner sense of feeling connected, feeling, back to the Statue of Liberty, that sense of belonging, that sense of we, and not being so completely locked into self and other. That must be more like what is that healing force. And I think it really is. And that is something we can cultivate even with our eyes closed, even if we're all alone, because it's true. It's what's real. And the more clearly we see reality, the more that happens. And that, I think, is so important. I know this has gone on so long and people are tired on top of everything else. But it's so important to remember just the healing aspect of that. And that brings me back to doing that thing that may seem very small, but is in service of that sense of connection. Like, I'm speaking to you from Barre, Massachusetts, where the Insight Meditation Society is. It's just next door through the woods over there. And on Valentine's Day, we're going to have our 45th anniversary. So I've turned impresario. I'm somehow organizing an event, like online, which you'll all hear about if you like. But it's very funny. Anyway, so I have a home here, and I have in recent years also been renting a small apartment in New York City. And I spent the month of February in California traveling. Got back to New York in early March. Taught some large programs with like in rooms with no ventilation. I don't know. We all made it through somehow. And as you recall, those were times like in terms of the pandemic where, there wasn't a lot of clarity. Like it was like wash your hands and don't shake hands. That was it. And use hand sanitizer. And I was in New York City. I taught a pretty large program. And that was the day I decided to leave and to come up here for what I thought was 2 weeks. So, but anyway, the situation in the place I was teaching was that the speaker sits down with the audience until they're formally introduced, and they get up on the stage and they speak. So I was sitting in the audience, and this woman sitting next to me was like frantically anxious. And I understood it. It's like nobody quite knew what was going on. And which I don't know if I should come, and then I came, but it's like, she was really distraught. So I said, well, there are various ways of breathing that might actually help calm your nervous system, which is true. Which, by the way, is just have your out breath be longer than your in breath. But, and I said, well, you might try that. She wasn't interested. And then I said, well, there's loving kindness meditation, which is a whole other method, which would help, in channeling some of that energy and giving it like a positive place to go. She wasn't interested. And then I looked at her and I said, is there anyone you can help? And she lit up and she became radiant. And she said, well, I have this elderly neighbor, and maybe I could just slip a note under her door and see if I can help her shop for groceries. And I thought, look at that. And I left New York, but I've heard that so many times. People say to me things like, I've lived in this apartment for 12 years. I never even knew my neighbors' names. And now we all know one another's names and phone numbers, and we check in on one another, and we make sure we're okay. And a friend of mine, calls the people who seem vulnerable in his building, or there's so many things that are possible. And again, they seem very small, but it's very interesting to look at how they affect us and how restorative that is, and how to be able to do that returns us to that sense of feeling whole and not so anxious and more balanced. And this is also very important to remember. So I'd like us to do some meditation together, and then we're just going to have a little bit of time for Q&A or comments if you have any. So I'm just making the assumption some of you are quite experienced in meditation. Others of you may be brand new, and that's fine. It's important to remember a little bit of what I was sort of implying. We're not practicing thinking we're going to wipe out all thoughts, and that's what a successful meditation looks like, or something like anxiety will not arise. It's all right. Whatever happens, what's most important is how we're relating to what's happening. So I'm going to go back to that foundational kind of exercise I talked about, where we choose an object of awareness. We rest our attention on that object. Our attention wanders, no doubt. We see if we can let go gently and then return. And so that's the exercise. It really is almost like a literal exercise in resilience, to be able to let go and come back, and let go and start over. That central object, that home base, can be anything. And here we have some of the many methods of meditation. It could be a sound, an image, a mantra. It could be phrases of loving kindness. Very commonly, at least in some part of one's practice, it's something like the feeling of the breath, the actual sensations of the in and out breath. And if for some reason the breath doesn't work for you, it feels, you have a physical condition, or it's too emotionally laden, something else that's already happening, like your hands touching, something like that. Because the idea is to get comfortable and familiar with that kind of resting in the moment on this object. Because then when you're at work or you're commuting or you're on your 15th Zoom of the day or whatever, and you're starting to feel very reactive, you can just come back to that. Let's say the breath. Just take a breath. And that returns you to the moment and to a greater sense of balance. So I'm going to guide it as though we're the breath, and you can just see if that works for you. So you can sit comfortably, close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. You can start by listening to sound, whether it's the sound of my voice or other sounds. It's a way of relaxing deep inside, allowing our experience to come and go. Of course, we like certain sounds and we don't like others. But we don't have to chase after them to hold on or push away. Just let it come, let it go. And bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. And bring your attention to the feeling of your breath. Just the normal, natural breath. You don't have to try to make it deeper or different. And wherever you feel it most strongly, most clearly, maybe that's the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen. Find that place, bring your attention there, and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. Without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. And if you find your attention has wandered, you've gotten lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. You can recognize you've been gone, see if you can let go. Return your attention to the feeling of the breath. No blame. You don't have to feel like you failed. That is the practice. To be able to let go and start over. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So thank you. I think, Scott, are you going to read the question to me, or are you going to?
Sure, yeah. And thank you, Sharon, for what you shared and with the guided practice. And we'll take a little time, maybe 5 or so minutes, to talk through some questions. And if anybody has a question, this could be a nice time if you'd like to put it into the Q&A. We may not get to all of them, but we'll get to some of them. And the questions that have been posed really range from they're all very poignant and tender, from the personal to the collective, and of course, both at the same time. So one question, Sharon, is, can you say something about anger? How can we better deal with the real anger that is out there these days? How do you mindfully interact with people whose anger arises from a belief system that is not based on a shared reality?
Well, I mean, I think the first part is really working with our own anger, is dealing with our own anger. And then it's what it's like to be the recipient of what is really like hatred. And in terms of our own anger, I think, anger is such a complex state. If we look at it, we'll see moments of sadness, moments of fear, and very often moments of a kind of helplessness at the root of it. And I think if we can get there, then again, that's an invitation to do something. Take one small step, put it into action. In life, we rely sometimes on people's anger to, I think every one of us has probably been in a meeting or some gathering where the angriest person in the room was pointing at some problem and saying, "Look at that, everyone look at that." And we're all studiously looking the other way. I'd rather not, actually. So there's a kind of cutting through energy that's really important. But in the Buddhist psychology, anger is likened to a forest fire which burns up its own support, which means it can damage us incredibly. And again, this is not feeling anger. This is being consumed by anger because we feel what we feel. But when it becomes this kind of chronic, state that in some ways we're actually cultivating, then it's just consequential to do that. And when I was writing Real Change, I had the thought, you know what I want to quote? I want to use that Gandhi quote where he said something like, if you're lost in anger, and again, I want to make that distinction. If you're lost in anger, it's like drinking poison, thinking it's going to kill the other guy. So I looked it up because I wanted to use it. I never once saw it attributed to Gandhi. I saw it attributed to the Buddha and Oprah Winfrey and the Big Book of AA and Carrie Fisher and Nelson Mandela, and no idea who said it, But that's sort of the point. It's not because it's the bad thing to feel. It's out of compassion for ourselves that we look for other sources of strength. And they exist, like compassion itself. We think of it as so weak and meek, but it's actually a tremendous force. And so it's like we make the exploration in that spirit. And then the anger coming at us, it's scary, If I take the import of the question correctly, it's like we have to learn. I think the most popular thing I've ever seen on the internet, I guess there are ways of measuring that, is one thing. It's compassion doesn't mean we don't fight. It means we don't hate. So it's very much in the spirit of what I was just saying. We have to protect ourselves. We have to work with boundaries. We have to try to do the best we can in this world to make it safer for others. And that's action that really needs to be taken, but it doesn't have to come from a place of hatred toward others, even though that may be what's coming toward us. And here too, this is one of the situations where I think having a community and not feeling like you're going it alone is just much easier. And it's weird these days, maybe it's going to be an online community or people who share your values, or going to like a mindfulness class or something like that, but it would help.
Thank you, Sharon. So the questioner asks, what is arising now is my stage 4 cancer. You mentioned that it will come and it will go. Technically, it will not go. So how do you move past the difficult feelings?
Well, first, I'm very sorry, of course, and what a difficult time, where so many kind of rituals of coming together or places of finding comfort. It's not easy. So I'm sure it's especially hard. I didn't mean the situation would go, but feelings actually do come and go. Like somebody wrote that something that was very important for me, where they were talking about grief, and I think this is true for even crushing grief. Grief is love that doesn't have the usual place to land. The person is gone, or the situation is just not going to be that we had kind of counted on, that we loved. Shattered expectations, shattered ideals, body betraying you. I mean, there's so many ways in which I think if we look deeply into the heart of grief, we also find that love. And I've found that people move from one to the other. That the grief is not necessarily a steady state, especially if we also look for the love. Just the way if we find the helplessness inside the anger and do one small thing. Here too, we can rest even for a few moments in that sense of love. For oneself, for maybe those who have been in our lives. In the Buddhist tradition, they say if you're sitting with somebody who is dying, you should remind them of the good they've done in their life and try to be specific. Like, when I was a child, you took me to the playground and I really had fun, or whatever. And I always thought that is a weird piece of advice, because my concern was that it would make the person who was ill and dying more attached to life, and therefore they would struggle more, they would suffer more, which would be the last thing you ever wanted to do. But so many people, of course, through the years have asked me what to do, what to say, and I just say, well, this is what I heard, and every single one of them has come back and said it was perfect. It brought love into the room, and that people there was just a kind of energy of, even if it was a small specific thing in the midst of a lot more turmoil or stress or whatever had been a part of one's life, again, it's like it returns somebody to something that is whole or intact inside of them, and that feeling of no matter what, life has not rejected us. This is a part of life. And I think we also struggle here in this culture because most of us have a pretty weird conditioning around dying. Like, it's this big surprise, like that. It's like shocking, it shouldn't happen, but it does happen. And there's such a premium in this culture on being in control. So on top of everything else, we often have this feeling of humiliation or failure or something, which is just so odd, but it is a genuine conditioning. And there's so much fear around the loss of control. And it's not just that. There's so much fear around suffering in general that many people I know have had terrible tragedy in their life find that their friends get kind of uncomfortable around them, because they are, as one woman said to me who had this terrible thing happen in her family. She said, my friends have all had golden lives. Nothing ever goes wrong. And so now I am a symbol of life gone awry. And I said to her, of course, I don't believe for a moment that nothing ever goes wrong. And clearly we are all subject to loss and change and so on. And so I had this experience when she just came to talk to me once, and I heard these words come out of my mouth. So what I said to her was, I think you need new friends. And then I said to her, you should meet my friends. They're all a wreck, Something's always going wrong. But they're not all a wreck. You're not all a wreck. But it's like, that's the truth of things, that life can be really tough. And again, it's such a hard time to try to find a community and a supportive community, but it's possible. And I think everybody deserves that as we confront these things.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the various questions. I'll read a short comment and then 2 questions, and we'll close. The comment is that mindfulness has been my real go-to. I'm a frontline worker, nurse in the ED, and I could not do my job efficiently without it. A question is, I've observed that much of what motivates me at work is the desire for recognition, which seems like a form of ego. What should a mindful mindset do with ego? How do we avoid being motivated by feeding our egos while still finding motivation?
I think the first step is not to try to get rid of it, like I've got to reform, I've got to be coming from a different place, but stay interested in it, because you will see, just like with anger, you will see maybe the energy of it and how it helps you cut through boundaries or whatever, and cut through a sense of limits. And you'll also see the tremendous pain of it, because first of all, recognition tends to be brief. And you also tend to watch other people get recognized, and maybe they're getting more recognized than you were getting recognized. And so it's never quite enough. And, maybe the person, the supervisor, whoever, didn't say it quite in as fulsome a way as you thought it was deserved. And I say all this as an author, and Scott's nodding his head, he's too as an author. Because maybe you put your heart into something and you're coming from a really good place and you do it the best you can, and you never know how that book reviewer woke up in the morning, and what they're going to say. And I think the more we see the vulnerability, the frailty of that, the more just automatically, it may come up, but it's not the governing impulse, and we more move to wanting to do something very well, and we can recognize it.
Thank you. I would imagine embedded in the question is, and if the mindfulness and other practices to really help cull or be more skillful in relationship to our egoic impulses and needs is attended to, would motivation fall away? Or
yeah, and people ask that quite often. No, I think motivation doesn't fall away, but I've heard it from artists, quite a lot, who maybe have the conditioning that only great internal distress can produce great art, or people who are quite successful in the world in various endeavors, that they'll lose their edge, that they'll be kind of like lazy and complacent or whatever. But none of that happens. It's just a thought. And so then it's a question of seeing, are you willing to make the experiment? You can always stop being mindful if you find that, it's like really bringing down your career.
Or a question is there any filmmaker, or serial television you've been enjoying during the pandemic?
I haven't watched, no, I have very low taste, I should say, in such things, so it wouldn't be inspiring anyway. But
Is that a mindfulness teacher
oh,
thing?
well, there's always Hamilton. There's that, like
Yes, I know you're a big fan of
I'm a
Hamilton.
giant fan of Hamilton, and I happen to notice that uh, the poet at the inauguration at Joe Biden's inauguration was also a giant fan of Hamilton. She had 2 lines in the poem that were from Hamilton. I was like, I know those. But yes, I would say Hamilton. Disney Plus, $6.99 or something for the entire month. You can watch as many times as you want.
How is it possible to meditate when in excruciating pain and anxiety in this day and age?
I think we have to let go of a kind of rigidity about the form of the meditation and the time. There's nothing sacred about sitting for an hour, for example, as compared to 3 minutes, or walking instead of sitting, or drinking a cup of tea mindfully so you feel a little more grounded and a little more connected. Do it through activity. So, I've sometimes said to people in the past, uh, you know, lie down in fetal position if that's what's going to feel comfortable. And you don't have to close your eyes if that's scary. And think about 3 to 5 minutes, if that. Experiment with loving kindness practice, and especially loving kindness for yourself. It is its own method, and it just opens us to another approach. Like when we're in terrible pain or terrible anxiety, it's also easy to get into a kind of fixation on those states, as though that was the entire sum of all that could ever be. And even just moving our attention a little bit into something that is sort of more whole and more replenishing can be very important. So it's like an experiment, and if you have an opportunity to work with somebody, a teacher, so to speak, who's not going to be rigid, you've got to sit for an hour without moving and excruciating. Let's add to your pain, by having you sit in some unbelievable posture for an hour with your eyes closed, and that's not right. But there are many, many teachers who are quite skilled at sort of understanding the essence of what we're going after. And it's not secondary practice. It's not really second best. It's responding to the circumstance for what is actually going to be more balancing.
Would you discuss working with the military and police? And do you see those groups as receptive?
That was really for Amishi, and Ellen is a friend of mine, so
Okay.
she
All
can
right.
actually ask
Okay.
Amishi.
Can you speak to the balance between allowing sadness and grief to flow through and letting go or not clinging to it? I find my sadness so exhausting and a residue hard to wash away.
Well, I think that's a good insight, and I would add to it, learn what balance looks like for you right now. It doesn't mean that it's balance forever, but that's the tricky thing about balance, is it's not a static state. Sometimes it looks one way, sometimes it looks another way. So it might be that limiting the amount of time that you're allowing sadness and grief to flow through needs to be limited. And that's fine. Like, I had this one meditation teacher, this Burmese teacher named Sayadaw U Pandita, who came over to Barrie to teach a 3-month retreat in 1984, which I and many people sat. And he was very fierce, very intense, very demanding. We'd never met him before, and suddenly we're sitting under his guidance for 3 months. And one day he was doing a question and answer session in the hall, and somebody asked, how long should I pay attention to physical pain before I move my attention to something that's easier to be with? So that might be listening to sound, or, I mean, there are various options. And that was an interesting question because physical pain is also our template for emotional pain. So how long should I be with it, allowing the feelings before I move my attention to something that's easier? And I thought, given his personality, he was going to say you should be with it till you fall over. I really did. And to my astonishment, he said, don't be with it for very long. And he said, it's not wrong to like be with it and be with it and be with it, but you'll likely get exhausted. So be with it, move to something that's easier. Go back to it. Move to something that's easier. That, one of the hindrances is that people tend to think that that means they can't do the real thing, but that is the real thing. Because our goal is actually balance. And so you make that experiment.
And a final question that sort of speaks to the wanting to share mindfulness, having found it to be very meaningful, is, as you mentioned, there are many communities suffering right now. How might those passionate about mindfulness practice share that interest and inspire others to try it out, especially in skeptical communities?
I think, it depends, because obviously you want to do that skillfully. But I know, for example, something that occurred to me earlier was at this place, the Garrison Institute in Garrison, New York, created first a film, now it's an app of me leading some very short meditations and yoga teacher leading some exercises that's free for healthcare workers. It's free for anybody, but the idea was that we created it for healthcare workers, and learning what things are available for people, and then not in a proselytizing way, but trying to see what you might be able to do to just even simply communicate that availability. Most of the meditation apps these days, 10% Happier, as an example, are offered for free to, their list keeps growing, healthcare workers, frontline workers, essential workers, teachers, because the times are so difficult and the work is so amazing. It's so important for all of us that, somebody shows up at that grocery store and we get to eat. So, even just learning about those things and being able to help communicate that, I think, is really important. And then if you're, part of, say, the mindfulness community, that you were talking about, I would find out in really local ways, what might be possible.
Thank you. I know that the Real Happiness Meditation Challenge is starting, and perhaps Kellen or Costanza, if it's possible, to put the link into the chat for everybody. So for those of you who would like to sign up for the Real Happiness Meditation Challenge, you can do so. Sharon's website is sharonsalzberg.com. That has a great deal of information. And you also have a podcast, the Meta Hour podcast. Might you just share a little bit about that? And also there was a question that some may have, which is somebody asked, which is, after Real Change, and I want to go back and maybe read some of your books, do you have a recommendation of what to start with?
It depends on what you're interested in. Real Happiness, which came out 10 years ago, or 11 years ago now, is sort of a how to either begin or renew a meditation practice. So it's got a lot of range of practices. My first book was called Loving Kindness. It's about loving kindness meditation. I also have a great fondness for faith, as Scott said, which was really like my faith journey. So they're all kind of different in those ways.
Yeah, those are three wonderful books. So that was Real Happiness, which really is a 28-day guide to a practice, which is what the challenge really sort of rests on. Faith, which is just a beautiful memoir in many ways, and then Loving Kindness, which really you're one of the great and helpful voices of that practice. as a closing comment, the Meta Hour podcast, because now you're a
Oh,
podcast.
metta, right. So metta, METTA, is the Pali word for loving kindness. And um, we started this podcast when my book Real Love came out, because it was an unusual way of trying to get the word out about a book, and then we never stopped. And so I seem to be working in kind of series like I was trying to do. It's mostly interviews with people. Occasionally we put up something where I'm just speaking, and it's extrapolated from that, but mostly it's interviewing people. And we're having a mental health series right now of different people from different aspects of mental health. And um, yeah, I learn a lot all the time, and it's really fun.
Thank you, Sharon. And so, on behalf of UMindfulness and Kellen and Costanza and Ariana, Amishi, and I, and everyone are so grateful to you for your support and your help. For all of you who've come to be together and tonight, thank you so much. And Sharon, thank you very, very much for, in the midst of so much interesting and challenging and very sad and tender things happening in our lives, close and far, for taking the time to be with us. We look forward to seeing you again and wish you
Yes,
luck.
thank you.
Thank you all, everyone. Have a good evening, and let's wish for a 2021 that offers a little bit of ease in the midst of all this.